Today's program is kind of about this, trends. There's magazines on your table if you want to look through it, but every 2 years, the Boulder Community Foundation issues the Boulder County Trends Report, which is a vital resource for residents of our county and our government, nonprofit, and media leaders. The Trends Report addresses some difficult questions that we may not like to ask but need to be asked nonetheless, such as, who deserves to live here? What's holding some of our students back while others succeed? How can we best steward a healthy environment? Who's not participating in our vibrant arts scene? And how can we ensure that everyone feels safe and valued in our Boulder community? Chris Barge is a former member of our club, and he's here today to give us some of the answers from the latest Trends Report to these questions and others. Chris.
So a gorilla walks into a bar and orders a martini, to the amazement of the bartender. Bartender hands him the martini, and he notices the gorilla has a $20 bill in his hand. He takes it. He decides to see how smart is this gorilla, and he gives the gorilla only $1 in change. After silently sipping his drink, the bartender decides to break the silence and says, "You know, we don't get many gorillas in here." The gorilla finally pipes up and says, "Well, at $19 a drink, it's not a surprise." It's nice to see so many familiar and friendly faces. Thank you for this opportunity to check in a little bit on how the social, economic, and environmental health of Boulder County is. It's an opportunity not just to reflect on all of these themes, but also to think about the work that each of you, as supremely civically engaged citizens of Boulder County, how the work that you're doing fits into the context of so many lives here. So without any further ado, we will dive right in. Okay, so I want everyone to leave here with at least one magazine. We have more up here on your way out. Feel free to take them. You'll notice that my name and contact number are on the back. Each of you is involved on like 3 boards. So if you have an organization that would benefit from understanding a little bit more about the context in which they work, please do invite me in for a similar conversation. The Community Foundation has been around since 1991. We've been producing this Trends Report since the late 90s. It has evolved into a journalistic endeavor. It is a community indicators report. We're fortunate to have a community indicators report in this community. It's very rare for a community foundation to do this. We go through a 3-step process every 2 years. First, we update 150 community indicators that we've tracked over time. Then we ask ourselves, what is new and persistent in what we're seeing? Then, like David Letterman used to say, we go to experts and we say, is this a thing? And if it is a thing, then we don't stop there. We go and we find the emblematic example of someone living in our community who is in the middle of this struggle. Then we reverse it in the storytelling and we present you about 50 different feature stories of your neighbors, tuck charts and graphs in on the side. And then everything that hits the cutting room floor in the 100-page magazine is available on the website, where you can find all kinds of data and discussion of it, as well as videos, and a link to our new partnership with KGNU, which is a trends radio podcast. Turns out to be a mini documentary series. It's very, very good. With our support, they hired a Latina bilingual journalist, Rosana Longo, and she is producing every 3 or 4 weeks this mini documentary. The most recent one was about people in our community with disabilities and some of the isolation that they feel and some of the possible solutions on a systemic level that we could focus on. The Trends Report is our research arm, and then we also do some programming. So let's dive in. This would not have been possible without the sponsorship. Some of you are connected to these generous sponsors. So thank you, Boulder Community Health and Boulder County, Knight Foundation, the Chamber, Google, and Plant Moran. The Trends Report is divided into 7 chapters. We begin with an overall context perspective on our demographics. And the first thing that we notice is that the skyrocketing cost of housing is literally changing who we are. It calls to question who deserves to live here. At a median home price of near on $1 million in the city of Boulder, the answer is on the wall. Families are moving east to the east part of the county, have been for some time, and in the last decade, our median age has increased 14 months. When I was a member, I remember Michael Weatherwax, the accountant, was president, and you calculated that my enrollment as a member in this club actually decreased the median age by 14 months. I was much younger then. When you want to take a look at where people are from, you see that we have really a lot of turnover here. I would like you to raise your hand if you were born in the state of Colorado and look around. Okay, would you say that's less than a third of us? Yeah, so that's a little bit less than the county average. About a third of us across the county were born in the state of Colorado. If this were an entirely Latino local audience, 80% of you would have raised your hand. One of the trends that we track is that we are participating in the first world phenomenon where over the last 100 years, the human race is expecting to live 65% longer than we did 100 years ago. It's probably time to start referring to seniors as not 65 plus, but something like 75 plus. At any rate, that yellow line is showing in Boulder County that we expect to almost double from 50,000 to nearly 100,000 the number of 65 plus people living in our county by 2050. And so what this calls is questions about what is our civic infrastructure and our infrastructure in general looking like? What are our attitudes towards our elders, and how does that need to change? If you are a veteran, would you raise your hand? That is a really good, thank you for your service. Pictured here is Ray Myers, served in Vietnam. He's one of 14,000 veterans living here in Boulder County. And so as we reflect on our capacity to accommodate and our attitudes towards seniors, it's important to acknowledge just what a contribution they have made. When we want to talk about where our demographics are headed, it's helpful to understand stories like that of J.L. Myers, who is standing here on the tracks that separate East and West Longmont, a 5th-generation Longmont resident. His grandfather remembers a time when it was understood that if you're Latino, you do not live on the west side of the tracks. And yet, this is our fastest growing population. 50% of the Latino residents in our county are under the age of 25, compared to 1/3 of our general population that is aged under 25. When we look at our housing prices and we think folks are moving east, it is borne out in the statistics. When you look over the most recent 5 years available, you see that the double-digit growth is in the East County. It's especially in Erie, it's in Louisville, it's in Lafayette, and that our cities of Boulder and Longmont really have reached a mature rate of less than the double-digit growth that, for example, Longmont was experiencing in the prior decade. When we look at education, we see record high school graduation rates worth celebrating. We also see a continuation of the disparities for minority students and students from low-income families that have dogged us for many decades. First of all, it's important to acknowledge that we live in a place where we are twice as educated as the national average. There are twice as many adults holding bachelor's degrees here than across the country. About 63%, I believe, hold a bachelor's compared to 32%. In the city of Boulder, there are more adults with advanced degrees than with bachelor's alone. And we live in the highest per capita place in the country for women with bachelor's or higher. A big headline in education is the provision of full-day free kindergarten, which for the first time this fall was available across the state, thanks to the legislature deciding to make Colorado, wait for it, the 32nd state to do so. We're catching up, folks, and we got a long way to go. What about those 0 to 5-year-olds? What sort of public support are they getting for their preschool education? At this point, you got to wait till the year before kindergarten. You're provided 2.5 hours, and that's not enough for the school-dependent kids coming from backgrounds where school will make all the difference. They need an earlier start. We know we have a wide achievement gap. What I focus on here, this chart shows reading proficiency across grades 3 through 10 in both of our county school districts as well as across the state. I am less interested in the fact that in Boulder Valley, the kids from wealthier and Anglo backgrounds and more educated backgrounds are scoring higher. That's to be expected when your parents are on the wealthier and more educated end of things. You're going to hear 30 million more words than your peers who don't come from that background. What I'm interested in is the lighter shade, which is tracking the reading proficiency, in this case, of students from low-income backgrounds. They are faring no better in our school districts than the state average. So how is it that here in the wealthiest, most educated corner of our state, our public education and all the wraparound services in our community are not able to allow these kids the promise of a public education, which should be to level the playing field for all? This comes at a time, I mentioned a happy headline that we are at across the state, all-time highs for high school graduation. Well, are any of you current or former educators? Raise your hand. Is high school enough anymore? It's not. In fact, the data bears that out. The income prospects over a lifetime are now indiscriminate between a high school dropout and a high school graduate. It starts to improve as you start to look at associate's degree holders, bachelor's degree holders, and on up. But that's very different than a generation or two ago. And so with the explosive advances of everything from the cloud to the iPhone, we need to start preparing our kids finally for a 21st century education. So what we look at is, okay, after high school, who's enrolling in college? And we see a vast disparity there also for the minority and the kids from low-income backgrounds. When it comes to health, we live in a beautiful place. We breathe this fresh air. We look at the mountains. We feel inspired. And yet there are things that we need to focus on when it comes to public health. There was really good news at the last time I presented this trends report 2 years ago. That was coming at a time when we were at an all-time high for enrollment on the key public health supports of Medicaid and CHIP Plus, which is basically Medicaid for kids and expecting mothers. We had gone in 3 short years after the passage of the Affordable Care Act and the commensurate expansion of Medicaid adopted by the state of Colorado from 30,000 Boulder County residents enrolled in one of those supports to 60,000. In the time since the last trends report, that has dipped by 10,000 enrollees. We're now at about 50,000, and we're watching this closely. You know, a lot of these indicators don't wiggle much over the 2-year interim between trends reports. This is different. Couple factors there. The individual mandate was stripped out of the Affordable Care Act. That's having an impact. So too is the national rhetoric that is intimidating and causing the avoidance of social health supports by not just the undocumented residents among us, but their family and their peers. There is one positive driver causing this, and that is that the economy is the best it's been historically for a very long time. When you have unemployment in Boulder County near about 2% currently, then you're going to have more people switching from public health support to employer-sponsored health care. That's good news. I want to acknowledge that some coverage is not full coverage. Raise your hand if you feel the coverage that you're paying for could be better. Okay. So just acknowledging that some coverage is not full coverage. Vaping is a big deal. 2 years ago, we were focused on opioids, and that we have turned the corner on opioids. It's still a really big deal. Certainly, anyone from Boulder Community Hospital could talk with you about how big a deal that is. But the reason why we were able to turn the corner is that the community came together. And across the nation, there was a shift from a perspective that said 0 is the amount of pain a patient should tolerate, to you should be in touch with your pain. It should be under control, but it shouldn't be 0. That has fundamentally changed the amount of opioids, OxyContins, the gateway into heroin. Similarly, it is really time for us to attack vaping, and I'm proud to say that the city of Boulder is taking very assertive action here with the recent tax that they put to the voters who passed it this November on vaping. A recent local survey of high school students showed that while 80% of them took for granted that cigarette smoking was bad for your health, only 50% of them believed that vaping was. A week or two ago, we heard news that Boulder High had a whooping cough problem, a pertussis outbreak. The reason this happens is that we do not have herd immunity. Herd immunity is where you have 94% of your population vaccinated. We in Boulder have an issue with this. We raise free-range organic children. We don't like sticking needles in them, and the consequence is a health risk. There are indicators that we can measure and see. Then there are dynamics that we feel and know. Mental health falls into this second category. We cannot know for privacy reasons and for stigmatic reasons just the extent to which our community suffers from various mental health issues. But we see it in our friends, our neighbors, our community every day. And we've spent some time in this trends report addressing what is going on. The Della Cava Pavilion is a good example of focus on that. So too is the tax that was passed 2 Novembers ago by Boulder County voters to invest in the jail. It was a response to Sheriff Joe Pelly, who told us that decades ago when he started his career in the Boulder County Jail, there were a handful of people suffering from serious mental health issues who were inmates there. That has increased to about half the population on any given day. And so it is a positive thing that we are investing in their ability to not just expand capital, but programmatic and start looking upstream at these issues. Other areas of focus that we see evidence of include, again, opioids, suicide prevention, and paying attention to the fact that LGBTQ high schoolers and adults really suffer at twice the rates than the average population. This may be the most consequential chart that we run in trends. When you look at what has happened to real estate prices, you look at that from 2 sides of a coin. If you've been invested here in Boulder for decades, you're appreciating the fact that the investment has really paid off, continues to pay off. If you, for example, in the city of Boulder, are amongst the majority, 55% of residents who rent rather than own, you're looking at a steeper and steeper hill to climb if you are to invest in the American dream. More likely, you're looking outside of Boulder for that first opportunity to get a foothold into building wealth through home ownership. And so this is having a demographic impact as far as where young families are able to grab a foothold. But it also is creating a crisis for us because for every new job, and we've created 40,000 jobs over the last decade in Boulder County at a healthy clip, for every new job created that is offering a 6-figure salary, that's creating a need for a $25,000 wage. That's because people who make six figures don't want to make their own coffee, do their own laundry, or clean their own house. The list goes on, but an integrated economy is one where people are able to live near where they work, no matter the wage they earn. 3.5, that's a stunning statistic. That is the rate at which we have added jobs for every household that has been, for every new housing unit that has been built over the last decade. We have not widened the lanes on the Diagonal or Arapahoe or Baseline, and so we are sitting in traffic. You may have noticed, traffic's a little worse compared to 10 years ago. Look what it costs to put a preschooler to pay their tuition for a year here in Boulder County. It's like college tuition. If you were to live in Pueblo, you would pay about half that bill. It's worth understanding also that there is a big wage gap between Latino and white non-Hispanic residents. The gap is that the average Latino household makes 58 cents on the Anglo dollar. Nationally, that wage gap is that Latinos make 75 cents on the Anglo dollar. It's also much more expensive to live here. You need to earn about 3.5 times the federal poverty level in order to be living at a level that is deemed to be self-sufficient. You need to make $85,000 a year. Well, look at the chart on the bottom. Who's making $85,000 a year? The median Anglo household is earning the amount that you need for self-sufficiency. The median Latino family is making half that. We have a worse gender pay gap in Boulder County than the state, and the state's is worse than the nation. This is across all levels of employment, and it means that women in Boulder County are making 75 cents in the same job as men, 75 cents on the dollar. Community Foundation is going to be investing in studying this further this year to try to shed some light on why this is. When you look at where child poverty is focused, you can track the housing prices. Longmont continues to be the most affordable place to live, and it is where the family poverty is concentrated. There's a story that Julie Van Domelen, about how she wrote a white paper recently on family poverty. She made the point that actually the 600 families with children in the city of Boulder who are living below the poverty level, if somehow we found a way to supplement their incomes, bring them up to the poverty level, it would cost $5.4 million annually. That's a lot of money. It's 3% of the city's budget. It's less than what the city spends on efforts for municipalization. Just saying. On the environment, what a gorgeous land we live in. Boulder County, 740 square miles. Longs Peak, 14er, clear out to nearly I-25. Publicly owned and protected land accounts for 2/3 of the acreage in this county. When you sum up the Forest Service land, the 1/8 of Rocky Mountain National Park in our county, the county open space, the various city open spaces that we've been aggregating since the 60s. And we are seeing a movement now from acquisition to stewardship. And let's hope we're able to get out from behind the 8 ball on stewardship. I'll get back to that in a second. Our topography means that even though it may look like we have beautiful, pristine environment, our air quality really suffers. We have a lot of high ozone days, and we consistently get an F for our air quality. This is because of our topography in part. The prevailing winds come from both sides of the Rocky Mountains, and they pool in the metro area before hanging out there with that inversion dynamic that then dissipates out towards Kansas. But not until we've actually suffered from a lot of not clean air. What contributes to this? It's cars. We have a solo commuting rate that's better than the national average at 65%, but only 10 percentile points beneath the 75% nationally who commute solo to work. Also, oil and gas production and fracking is a big contributor, as are commercial buildings. This is a picture of Marcus Macaulay. I want to tell a little story. He has a farm outside Longmont. The acquisition of open space, as you know, is broad and vast. The city of Boulder actually owns the property next to his farm, even though he's in Longmont. But it had gone neglected for so long that the soils had built up against his fence. And the sheep that were pictured on a slide a couple slides ago they were his sheep, but they were able to walk across his fence over to the open space. And he said, wait a minute, something's going on. So he's been in touch with the City of Boulder Open Space, and they're piloting ways that they can be better stewards. Soil quality actually has an impact. If we were to be better stewards of the soil around the world, carbon sequestration would be more possible. The city is also starting to track some emerging indicators and do some work when it comes to our urban canopy. You know, all these trees that are getting, these ash trees that are getting hacked down everywhere because of the emerald ash borer, which now is spread beyond Boulder County after trying to quarantine it. And then finally work on making sure that we have a healthy pollinator population. These are all things that we're tracking in the environment. When it comes to the environment, access is something we're worried about. We have two conflicting values in this county. One is for environmental preservation. That's what we lead with. It's beautiful here. We want to protect it. We want to have rules against groups tromping across our open space and our parks. On the other hand, that is a very curated, Eurocentric way of thinking of using the environment, the unbuilt world. We know that other cultures appreciate spending time with one another, and they value being outside. But our pro-environment policies are preventing us from building more picnic shelters, fishing piers, the sorts of things that would attract our Latino neighbors who are more likely to have grown up here into the crown jewel that we've spent the most taxpayer dollars of anywhere in the country to preserve. Also on the environment, we're looking here at the fact we are water consumers. On average, 81 gallons per household compared to a national average of about 90 gallons per household. So we're a little better than the national average. We should be. We're in a water-constrained atmosphere here. Also, we're looking at our use of coal. And the good news is that Excel is on a trajectory here in the future to really swap places as far as how much coal they're using and how much is generated from renewables. At the same time, there's pressure with the whole municipalization debate here in the city of Boulder. So there's good focus on trying to get that renewable number up as quick as possible. We also have this big fight with Denver Water about Gross Reservoir, and they want to double the size of that. It is an environmental question. It's also an equity question. Denver Water is storing that water for the use of all the Front Range. It's one thing to say, well, people should quit using water. It's another to look at ourselves and say, well, we all do use water. And so if we're not going to expand Gross Reservoir, it's going to push the problem to call the question of where we're going to build a new reservoir. So it's not often part of the conversation about, if not here, where. With the arts, one thing we're noticing that's positive, for one thing, who here is an artist? Raise your hand, Jack. Okay. We are underrepresented in this room. The National Endowment for the Arts figured out that in the city of Boulder, we have more per capita artists than anywhere outside Los Angeles or Santa Fe. It's remarkable. On the other hand, not everyone here is enjoying the arts. And so there are lots of efforts afoot to try to expand access, make it more culturally relevant. The Dia de los Muertos Festival at the Longmont Museum is one shining example. They attract 6,000 to their festival every year. It's worth checking out if you haven't. At the same time, we're tracking that after a strong run-up over the last several years, there's been a drop-off as far as artist employment. We're not sure exactly why. Maybe this is just a natural moderation after a strong drop-off. But I would suspect that some artists, though it's popular to be a starving artist in New York, might not like the high cost of housing. There are also efforts by Modus Theater and the like to participate in art for social change. This is Jorge Ramos reading a monologue written by, his name is Christian. He's a young man that immigrated here to Boulder County. There's a push in these undocumented monologues to give national attention to the stories and the struggles of our immigrant population. Finally, we get to the chapter called Civic Engagement, Civic Participation and Giving. Every one of you is very civically engaged. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to achieving connected, inclusive communities. Some may remember on March 1st what happened with Zaid Atkinson, African-American Naropa student who was picking up trash outside his Naropa housing, and a Boulder police officer asked him for his identification. Didn't believe that he lived there. And a confrontation ensued, lots of backup called, guns were drawn. It wasn't until over this police scanner, a heads-up Naropa groundskeeper heard what was going on, ran over there. He happens to be white. And he said, wait, he's one of ours. We have work to do. That's a flashpoint. It's an example. We like to think that we're an inclusive and accepting community, but when we contact, this is the only original part of our research we do for the report. Everything else is an aggregation of available studies. We do survey about 300 Boulder County residents. It's a nice cross-section, representative sample in terms of gender, geography, racial and ethnic makeup, age. Consistently, we get these answers. We poll about which of these subpopulations do you feel our community is most open to? We feel we are most open in Boulder County to our gay and lesbian population, and we are least open to minorities, immigrants, and also not very open to seniors. Thinking back to how our senior population is expected and projected to grow, thinking back to what is our fastest growing ethnic population, it's the Latino population, these are of concern. And then the census. Coming up, and every 10 years, make sure you fill out the census. Starting March 8th and through April 1st, you'll have an opportunity for the first time to go online. You'll get a letter, a postcard in the mail inviting you to do so. It's 10 questions that'll take 10 minutes and will have an impact on the next 10 years of your life. This will decide whether we get the expected 8th congressional district in Colorado that we think that we'll get if we get a complete and accurate count. It's also going to determine how much money from federal sources lands in Boulder County. There are 55 braided streams of federal money that comes into Boulder County. What it works out to per Colorado resident not counted is $2,300 in federal funding missed every year times 10 years. So that's $23,000 for everyone we miss. The Community Foundation is working with various complete count committees. They've got them in Boulder, they got them in Longmont, they got one focused on nonprofits, they got one at the CU campus, and they got a countywide super committee. I was on a conference call as I was schlepping Trends magazines in with the county just today. The county applied for a super grant from the state allocation. The legislature had allocated $6 million to help with census outreach. Kind of got the shaft. We have a reputation for not having needs in Boulder, and the committee, as we listened to the audio of their deliberations, ignored a very well-reasoned and complete application in favor of the idea that Boulder doesn't need anything. And so we had come up with an application for over $500,000 in funding that would be used by dozens of partners. To help fill that gap, the Community Foundation has just opened a Census 2020 fund. So if you are interested in helping that cause, these will be directed grants to grassroots efforts among cultural brokers. These are people who come from hard-to-count populations, get organizations the funding they need to get the people who can best connect with the hard-to-count populations, make sure we get this number down and get the count up. And then finally, we've been tracking forever a curious dynamic in Boulder County, of which many of you are aware. On the one hand, in hard dollars, we're in the top 5% nationally, our county is, as far as the amount distributed to charity. But we're in the top 3% wealth-wise. What that means is that there's a $68 million opportunity for us as givers. If we would collectively give at the national average rate of 3.1% of income, rather than the 2.56%, that would mean 68 million more going to tax-deductible causes. And what a difference that would make for places like Community Food Share, for example. Okay, that's it. The emerging theme when I look at all of this is let's discover, connect, and engage. The better we know our neighbors outside of our friends and family, but people who are out there, if we stretch ourselves, if we connect with one another, we will better understand the needs. We got this. Thank you. I do think we have some time for some questions, and I believe John Cockey had one.
Oh, whoops, I'm sorry, Chris, but I'm going to cut all of that off because we are over time. I'm sure you did, and John, if you'd like to go up afterwards and talk to Chris and anybody else who would like to do that, please feel free. I'm sure Chris will stay to answer questions, but we do have to move on. Okay. And so thank you very much, Chris. On behalf of the Boulder County Rotary, we will be contributing in your name 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund. Thank you, Chris.